welcome to Live Free Legal. I'm Tiffany Lesnik, domestic violence attorney, survivor, and founder. In this episode, I sit down in part two with District Court Judge Beth Tanner from Moore and Hoke County, North Carolina, to talk about what it's really like to pursue justice in a small town courtroom. Many survivors feel afraid to file for a protective order or for custody in smaller counties, worried about back chamber deals, small town politics, or just not being believed. But change is coming. Judge Tanner is part of a new generation of trauma informed judges who are bringing compassion, fairness, and accountability to local courtrooms. She's also making history as one of the first judges to teach at the Moore County Domestic Violence Task Force training, a groundbreaking step in community education and judicial reform. Today, together, we are going to discuss how trauma-informed training is changing the way judges view victims and abusers, and what survivors need to know before walking into a small town protective order hearing. And we're also going to talk and share some practical tips and practical advice for presenting evidence and staying calm in court. So Judge Tanner, thank you so much for joining us today. Judge Tanner, you're the first judge to teach at the Moore County Domestic Violence Task Force training. What motivated you to step into that teaching role?
So one of the things I think is really important as judges, and this is part of being trauma informed, is as we have newer generations of judges coming up, my rule, and this is a common rule of judges sort of in my age range, is I never say no to anything. If I've got an opportunity to be in the community, unless I really just cannot be there, I do not say no. So anytime I'm approached about doing any type of teaching, I do that. We have had a change in North Carolina overall because the judicial branch has actually made some changes in that they encourage judges to do what we call these extrajudicial activities. So I think traditionally we were to show up on the bench, do our job, go home, and not talk about it. And that's kind of what we did as judges. And that is changing because what we're learning is the more we're out in the community, the better off we are inside the courtroom. I work with children quite a bit in my courts. I work with families and children. And if a child has seen me at an event in the community and then they're in my courtroom for some other reason, I don't know that child, but they see me and they see me as a person, not just as a scary lady in a robe. So
Right.
we really do that. That's really the basis of that. I never turn down an invitation to something if I can make it happen. I may not be able to talk about everything people want me to talk about, but I never turn down the invitation to try. This is a really unique opportunity because we get to talk to law enforcement officers and people that support victims of domestic violence and really educate them about what is actually happening inside the courtroom. So I think that's helpful.
Tell us more about the domestic violence task force training that you're doing.
Sure. So it is going to be a collection of folks that work with anybody who engages in or who gets involved in domestic violence. So it's going to be your law enforcement officers, it's going to be folks at friend to friend, it's going to be social workers, and they kind of have this training every year. My training really is we're going to start the morning off with me, and it's really going to be walking through the different types of ways that victims can access justice. We're going to talk about the differences between criminal domestic violence and civil domestic violence, that one remedy is not the only one you can seek. So a lot of times people say, well, go just get a protective order. That's a civil order. So we're going to talk about how it's important that if there's a crime that's been committed, you still need to seek those criminal remedies as a law enforcement officer or as an individual. In North Carolina, we're one of the few places where you can go take out your own warrant with a magistrate. So we're going to talk about those differences, and we're going to educate a lot about what ex partes look like. We've talked a lot about the differences in larger areas and smaller areas in our previous recording, but one of the things that I think is important to know is in a smaller area, a lot of times the way ex partes come in is we handle them as they come in. We don't have like a set hearing time. That sometimes can mean you have to wait. I'll give an example. In Hoke County, a lot of days, I may be the only judge there. So I'm doing my court. I'm also doing any emergency custody orders that come in. I'm doing any ex parte orders of any kind, injunctions. So we're going to talk a little bit about that with the task force members so that when they're talking to victims that they understand this is the process that's happening. We're not just making you wait. It's because we have other things happening. So it's good for us to be able to talk about what's happening behind the bench. And I think that's
Right.
helpful.
Right. Why do you think it's important for judges to receive domestic violence or trauma informed training?
Because lawyers are not trained to be trauma informed. We do not get that training in law school. Trauma informed training was required starting with my judicial class. I'm in my first term. So my new judges school was the first school where you were
Wow.
required to take trauma informed training as a new judge. Chief Justice Newby required that for every new judge. So we had
Wow.
to go through that trauma informed training. It taught us about, we call them ACEs scores, but it taught us about the kinds of trauma that were walking in our courtrooms. And it also gave us ideas for how we can ameliorate trauma. I think every judge should have to do it. I think every lawyer should have to do it. In fact, I believe that enough that I've actually brought some CLEs here to Moore County, Hoke County, free CLEs for people to engage in that. Here's why. There are some very easy things that you can do as a judge and as an attorney and as a person to help with trauma. For example, you can set clear expectations in the morning. This is who I am. This is where you are supposed to be. We are in criminal district court. If you're not here for a criminal matter, you may need to be in another courtroom. The bailiff can help you find that courtroom. The courtroom day, how long will it go? How do we figure out the order of cases? So if you come in my courtroom, you will hear a little speech at the beginning where I say that. As I see people filter in the courtroom, I might repeat some of that information again because someone who's experiencing trauma, they need clear, concise instructions and expectations, and that helps ameliorate the experience they're having. The other thing we learn is that the truth is that court is traumatic. We can help sort of reduce the impacts of it, but court is going to be traumatic. You're there to face hard things. I mean, that's just how it is. And so I think sort of understanding that, it also educates us to recognize the difference between misbehavior and maybe a true trauma response. Someone who's having a stress response, instead of sending them immediately to jail for not following your orders, are there some things we can put in place to maybe help them remain in the courtroom or understand what they need? So all
Hmm.
that training is given to us, which I think is very helpful. We even have like a bench card now that kind of helps us run through some options to kind of help keep control in our courtroom and help people through their day.
Wow. Do you see the trauma training, has it increasing in frequency? Is it happening more often than it had previously?
Yes. So not only are all new judges required to do it, but it is part of, I'm a assigned juvenile judge. So it is a huge part of our training for juvenile courts, both in juvenile delinquency and in our abuse, neglect, dependency courts. We also have good training now around domestic violence. And so part of our judicial training in new judges school is a whole day about domestic violence and what that can practically look like for someone who's suffering from it.
Right. Can you just give us kind of an overflow of like some of the things you talk about in your training? What are law enforcement officers and the clerks and those folks taking the training? What are other judges learning about when they take this training course?
So when we go through our number one trauma informed training, we're learning about ACEs scores, what can cause trauma, and like I've already talked about, how we can kind of ameliorate the trauma. The domestic violence training we get as new judges at New Judges School is really cool. There's one judge that does it, but she basically gives us cards that are options, and we go in a room and we kind of go through what are our options. So we might have $10 and that's a hotel room, and we've been kicked out of our house because abuser was doing drugs or harming us. And it sort of gives you an idea. We run through what some real choices might be as though we are the victim, kind of running through those choices. I think that training is particularly impactful when we have to do that because many of us have not lived through circumstances like that. And to sort of realize that when someone comes into a courtroom, you're looking at their choices cold, right? Like you're looking at their choices on a piece of paper, and you need to really think about what does that look like for them in their real life. I recently had a training for abuse, neglect, dependency. So I'm getting a certification as a specialty juvenile court judge. And one of my jobs was to go to my local Department of Social Services office and sit there. Just sit there. Take a number like I was just a normal person and sit there and then fill out a service. It's like 10 pages to apply for some services. I mean, it's hard, you know. That's a training that all those juvenile judges that were with me did. So I think it's important that's being offered. And I think it teaches us sort of some practical things that are happening to people before they show up in our courtroom.
Wow, that's awesome. Has the training helped change the way that you interpret survivor or victim behavior in court?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So there's definitely a new kind of wave of how we manage court behaviors. So I think I use a lot of tools. I'll tell people I use little stress balls and things. I have them on my tables. It seems silly, but it does help. I keep an open conversation. So if I see someone that's looking nervous or stressed, I may have a bailiff. I may come to call a bailiff up and say, hey, can you check in on this person? Do they need to go sit in a separate room? As a judge, I don't really care about children being in my courtroom. In fact, I keep a swath of coloring books and books that I give away all the time and crayons and that kind of thing. Sometimes people have to bring their kids to court. There's nothing you can do about that. We offer the opportunity for parents like that to maybe sit outside. We have really leaned in as part of being trauma informed to the opportunity of remote attendance for certain types of hearings. Do you need to wait across the street at the friend to friend office? Do I need to give you a particular hearing time? So sometimes an advocate will come and say that. I think what the change has been is that we're more open to understanding why that's important. Instead of seeing that as a disruption to the day, we just understand that that's necessary to keep the day running smooth. So I definitely think that's made some changes in the practices that we have.
That's great. That's awesome. What advice would you give to victims, let's say, that are sitting in the courtroom and maybe their abuser's there with their entire family and the victims are feeling really uncomfortable? What kind of options do they have when they're in a courtroom setting to find more comfort?
So, one thing you can do is actually advocate for yourself. It's not an uncommon thing for attorneys to ask to clear a courtroom, and we can do that. Particularly if those folks that are sitting there are also going to be witnesses, you can ask that witnesses wait outside, so it's just you. There has to be a reason to close a courtroom. We have to have an actual reason to do that. But if they're going to be witnesses and you need them to kind of be sequestered, we do that. Other ways to be comfortable, I think, inside a courtroom are I recommend that people bring a support person with them. Courts are open. I really cannot recommend that enough. I know it can be hard to find somebody, but I do think that's helpful. In Moore County, we have friend to friend. In Hoke County, we have a domestic violence shelter there that they will come in and support people. Depending on the judge, and I do look to this practice, I will say to the courtroom, if you are here and you're seeking a protective order, I'm going to have you on the right side of the courtroom. If you're not, I'm going to have you on the left side of the courtroom. But you can choose to sit in a place that's more comfortable to you, and you can ask the court, can you wait somewhere else until your case is called? I think those are ways to kind of really help ameliorate that. You can also, if you have a friend there, you can answer the calendar call. And then when you answer to the calendar call, which is what happens in the morning, right? We have a calendar call. You can say, Your Honor, I would be much more comfortable if I was waiting outside. I do not know a judge that would tell you no. So I think those are ways you can kind of find more comfort. I will also just tell you more people doesn't mean better evidence. That's just never been true. Even though judges see a lot of people there, that doesn't necessarily translate into automatically better evidence. Judges are still very good at deciding who's telling the truth and who's not. That's kind of our job. Just because 10 people say a lie doesn't make it true.
Right. And I do want to talk about that next, actually. But one thing I will say, as far as asking the court if you can step outside until your case is heard, just be really mindful about who your judge is when you do that, because I have been in front of some judges who have really bad ADD. I'm just going to put that out there. And they may forget that you're outside, and they may end up dismissing your case for failure to prosecute when they call it to hearing because you're not there. So I would make sure that you are letting the clerk of court know, you're letting the bailiff know, maybe you have someone else in the courtroom that's like a placeholder for you as well, because that potentially could be a risk if you go outside of the courtroom and they call your case to hearing and you're not there, that it could be dismissed. But generally, if you have enough people that are there that know, hey, she's in the foyer lobby or whatever, you probably be okay. The other risk, I think, is if the abuser knows you're out in the lobby, are you susceptible that he may come out and try to harass you? So sometimes being in the courtroom, as uncomfortable as that is, may be the safest place for you to be, because there is a bailiff or a sheriff that's going to be in that courtroom that will provide protection for you as well.
Also put in there that the administrative office of the courts, just like any other kind of state agency, does have to make accommodations as it might relate to like legitimate disabilities. So we recently had a case here where an individual made specific accommodations prior to the hearing. And it was like, I either need to be heard at the end of the day or at a set time specific with reduced distractions. This person had a particular disability where distractions were an issue. And those are legitimate. So you can make those accommodation requests if you have a disability. Sometimes your mental health would qualify for that. So I think it's important to know that. I agree with
Yeah.
you. At least in Moore and Hoke Counties, we always have an advocate that stays in the courtroom the entire time. So if you will touch base with your local advocacy center, they'll make sure that the judge remembers you're across the street or you're
Right.
sitting
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah, and they're amazing, like domestic violence organizations that are in your community, regardless of where you live. And many of them will have advocates that will come to court with you. Do a Google search for what's near you and have someone with you for support, or bring a friend, like Judge Tanner said, or a family member. You don't have to do this alone. This is,
Right.
it is scary. So, what evidence makes the most impact in your courtroom? Do you have, a favorite type of evidence, or something that weighs more heavily on you when you hear it or see it?
So I don't know that I have a favorite type of evidence by any stretch of the imagination. When you're coming into a domestic violence hearing, it is very helpful to have printed out what you need me to see. So I think one of the things I frequently see when folks are not represented by counsel is they have something in their phone and they didn't print it out. Now, you'll be told at the courtroom doors you cannot bring a phone in. So at calendar call, you'll have to tell a judge, I need to bring my phone in. Most judges will say, that's fine. We'll take a recess, go get your phone. But what's helpful is if you have a series of text messages or something like that, print those things out. You know what I mean? Like bring them in paper form. I think that can be very helpful. Also, the best evidence is true evidence. I believe that a lot of times people will try to be dishonest about their own participation in something because they have some fear that if they did anything wrong, that it means that they're not entitled to protection or they're not entitled to custody or whatever the case may be. That is usually going to be a mistake. It's better just to be honest about what happened, even if that honesty maybe isn't super flattering to you. That will help the judge understand you are being honest. I do think that part is really important. That I'm teaching at the task force is really important. When you have an ex parte protective order, that is unrelated to what's going to happen at your domestic violence hearing. You've got to bring that evidence again, just like I never even heard that. Even if I was the judge that heard the ex parte, you have to stand up and give me that evidence as though I didn't read that complaint. I don't know anything about what's happening in your case. I will pull the complaint and read it, but the law really does require that you produce that evidence in that civil setting.
Right.
So I tell people that too. Make sure you bring all of your evidence.
Yes, yes, yes. And so what Judge Tanner is talking about is if you go for ex parte relief, the court's going to schedule a return hearing within a matter of days, depending on your state. Very important that you bring that evidence at 10-day return hearing, because the court's going to determine whether or not to enter your order on a more permanent basis at that hearing. Also, when you print your text messages, emails out, whatever it is that you're bringing, make sure it has a date on it. right? So many times you take a screenshot and it just says today or it doesn't have a date on it, and those might be inadmissible. So make sure you have a date on those screenshots that you print out. I know you touched on this just a little bit when you talked about good evidence to bring to court, but what are some common mistakes that victims make that hurt their case?
I think probably getting into a dispute with the opposing party. So when you're in court, you're talking to the judge. As the judge, I'm going to decide what's going to happen in the case. It can be very hard to let go of the little comments. You're going to get cross-examined by that person. And if they are representing themselves by this person that you have alleged is abusing you, so they have that right. We can't say they can't cross-examine you. And so I think probably the biggest mistake is getting lost in sort of the dispute right there in the courtroom about something. Stay focused. We'll use domestic violence as an example. You are here because you are asking the court for a protective order because you are in a personal relationship with someone and they have committed an act of domestic violence against you at some date, okay, or multiple dates. Focus on that. Just keep focused on that and don't get distracted by anything else that person wants you to talk about or say. Just keep focusing on that. And I think that is kind of where people get lost a little bit. Most judges will filter through that stuff, but I do think you can get lost in that. It doesn't matter how many names they call you. It doesn't matter if they have examples of when you weren't a perfect mother. It doesn't matter if they have examples of when they were the most amazing person on the earth. If on June 15th, 2025, they beat you up, that's domestic violence. And that's it. So
Mhm.
I think that part is getting lost in sort of those weeds. Just keep focused on those.
Right, absolutely. And I think women, well, they're told repeatedly over and over again that they're crazy, they're stupid, they can't do anything for themselves, they're worthless. And so that gets in their head. And then when it comes to trial, that stinking thinking, which is what I call it, they think, yes, he's going to say all these things about me and I'm going to lose my case, I'm going to lose my kids. And there's a lot of fear on the internet and social media that reinforce those thoughts, and so that they're terrified, right? And so I think what you said earlier, I think will resonate with the audience, that I have to appear to be perfect. I can't say anything or admit to anything that makes me appear in a bad light. And I think from your perspective, would you say domestic violence victims can appear to be pretty messy?
Absolutely. I say this to people all the time. It doesn't matter how imperfect you are. It doesn't mean that someone can commit an act of domestic violence against you. That's not how it works. So you can not say nice things sometimes, and that doesn't mean that someone gets to commit an act of domestic violence against you or frankly, gets to commit a crime against you. So people are rarely perfect. It doesn't mean they're not victims.
Right, absolutely. And if you want to know the statute in your particular state or jurisdiction, an excellent website to go to is womenslaw.org. They actually have the statute for domestic violence and for custody for every single state. So if you're not sure how to find your statute, if you go to that website will get you to that statute so you can read directly what your state says about domestic violence, how your law defines it, where you live. And also, if you'd like more training on how to prepare for court, we actually do legal coaching, and I help women prepare to testify, prepare their evidence, how to be the best witness possible when they're going into hearing for protective order or custody. And that's what we do at Live Free Legal. So I just had to give a plug there.
Yes.
And we do all these things that you're talking about, right? As a survivor myself and as an attorney, a domestic violence attorney, learned how to help women have the best possible outcomes in court. So how do we go as victims, as survivors, as women who care about their children? How can we as citizens support electing and re-electing more trauma-informed judges in our
So
communities?
I think you first have to care about your judicial elections. Judicial elections are usually on the back and bottom of your ballot. So they are never up at the top with the president or with the Senate. And you're going to see judicial elections on every even year. So that's when those elections are going to come. So 2026, 2028. And You're going to learn a lot about statewide judicial elections. Those people have money. Local judges don't have as much money to talk to you about who they are. So you need to figure out how to become engaged. Most of us will have Facebook and websites now at this point. I think that's something new. I was actually just talking to a judge who had just retired and said, I didn't do any of that. And I thought, I did. Yeah, we do that now. So you can learn a lot about us that way and see kind of what we're doing and being in the community. You can also talk to people about their experience with the judge, and see how that went. Not everybody is going to love everything I do. I think that's true. In fact, we have a legal system where you come and it's you versus somebody else. So somebody's going home unhappy. That's kind of
Right.
the way it works. What I have learned as a judge, and I think what is true to think about as a judge is, and when you're selecting a judge, is when that happened, how did that get managed by the judge? So, I can tell people they have a really high bond, and I have had a number of them say, Thank you, Judge, have a good day, because I treat them with respect and I take time to answer their questions. Everybody deserves that same thing, respect and time. So I think maybe asking people what their experiences were with a judge is helpful. Taking it with a grain of salt, right? They may not have liked the outcome in their case. And then we talked about this a little bit before, particularly if you're going to go to court, I'd go to court. Go sit. You're going to know who your judge is sometimes, but go see what that day looks like. And so you can kind of understand it. Being engaged, though, in knowing your local elected officials is important. We are in parties. So one way to do that is to get engaged with your chosen party so you can kind of know who your officials are. Those people will be really informed about your local elections for sure.
Right. And I can't say this enough as a practicing attorney that district court judges, these are the folks you go in front of for custody, for child support, for protective orders. If you have a child that gets caught smoking marijuana in the woods after school or whatever, that's who your child's going in front of, right? Maybe you have a small infraction. Maybe you get a ticket for speeding or whatnot, right? You're going in front of the district court judge. To me, party does not matter. I practice in front of Republican, Democratic judges all of the time. There are ones that I love, and there are ones that I'm always like, So it just doesn't matter to me. It's across the board. I think what matters the most is experience, right? What is their experience? Are they older? Do they have children? Have they been married? Have they had some kind of struggles in their lives? Or has everything been perfect and they've never really had to manage any kind of struggle or traumatic experience in their life? So find out about who you are electing. District court judges are important, and especially if domestic violence is important to you, you need to find out kind of what their position is on domestic violence. There are some judges and there are some attorneys that just don't really believe that domestic abuse is a thing. And so it's important for you to be aware of who those folks are so you're not electing them to the bench. So, Beth, where can folks find out more about you?
So I have a website, BethTannerForJudge.com. I also have a pretty active social media and Facebook page. I am running for reelection right now. So I'm out in the community. If you're in Moore and Hoke Counties, you're going to see me somewhere. So I'm out quite a bit in the communities at various events. But my election will be in March of 2026. Even when I'm not up for election, I keep an active social media page. I keep an active website because I think it's important for people to be educated. I will add one thing to looking for your qualifications for a judge. We have a number of opportunities as judges to seek education. We can, as judges, get Master's of Law, which is a degree beyond our law degree. Attorneys can do that too, but there's programs that we can get. We can get juvenile certifications. We can get an advanced family court education is an opportunity for us as judges. We can even get board certified, just like family law practitioners. I highly recommend that you look at your judges and see if they're seeking out that type of regular education. Because when we have new information about how we can be more, for example, the science of trauma and how that impacts the brain, the science of addiction and what that does to children or what that might do to a person in front of you. Those are all things we can learn in classes. And so I think you want to be looking for judges who are actively seeking that type of education. I think that is important because you'll bring that education into the courtroom. So I do think that matters quite a bit. So in addition to experience, probably also making sure they're remaining educated more than just oh, we have to go get this 20 hours a year or whatever, or I just went to the conference, just making sure that those judges in those particular courtrooms that you're looking to are really staying up on the law and the science behind the courtrooms they're in.
Right. And I'm really seeing change as far as education and training for judges like across the United States and even globally. This isn't just a North Carolina thing. So there is hope. I think change is coming to the family court system for those that are watching. And you can also support trauma informed judges. So just because Judge Tanner may not be in your particular district, if you want to support and ensure that other women and victims of domestic violence are going to get the protective orders and custody is going to be protected, you can financially support the campaigns of judges that are running, even if they're not in their community, if that's something you have a heart for. So definitely check out Judge Tanner's website, and we're going to have that on the screen for you. So, Judge Tanner, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on our webcast for the part one and part two series. If you didn't check out the part one series with Judge Tanner, I would really encourage you to get back on our YouTube channel and check that out. There will be a link for that as well. So, thank you for being a guest on our show. And I also want to thank you for the training that you're doing within your
Yeah.
community to help train more trauma informed law enforcement, social workers, judges, and people within the legal community. You're helping change what justice looks like, not just in your courtroom, but also in North Carolina. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It's a privilege to do the job.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those watching, remember the courtroom is changing. And there are judges like Judge Tanner who see you, who care, and who are learning every day how to deliver justice through the lens of trauma and truth. Again, if you missed part one, I'd encourage you to go back and watch it. If you are ready to dive deeper and need more help improving the legal outcome of your case, like us, give us a thumbs up and join our Empower Her private membership or sign up for legal coaching. You will receive legal resources, templates, and legal support. You can go to livefreelegal.com to join now. Also, join us next week, Tuesday at 7 p.m. for our next webcast. We have a webcast every Tuesday at 7 p.m. right here on YouTube at Live Free Legal. We will see you then.